Well, at the end of last week, Matt Kean was interviewed on this station by Laura Jays. I thought we'd analyse the most rubbish that he came up with, about which the Parliament of New South Wales knows virtually nothing. Like sheep, they followed one another, ideologically to support this rubbish. Liberal, Labor, Green, Nationals, Animal Justice, and of course the Greens were cheering. Well, here to inject a dose of reality is Mark Latham, who's fought tenaciously against this rubbish, but is vilified by the Minister as supporting big energy, and Matt Canavan, the Queensland Senator, formerly the Federal Energy Minister, and an absolute star in the making on the federal political scene. Gentlemen, welcome to you both. There is a lot to get through, so we'll keep it tight. He was asked, Kean, firstly, about the new energy policy and said it was about cheaper energy, jobs for the bush, etc. Listen to this.
This is about cheaper energy, this is about more investment, and this is about jobs for the bush.
Mark, your response.
Well, Alan, 2 points there. Kean was saying that there'd be a cut in electricity bills of $130 a year. But the modelling and the real statement is that this is a projection 15 years from now if the state government does nothing. It just sits there and watches the existing coal-fired generators close, and only then, off this enormous spike in prices 15 years from now, would there be some relief under this plan. So the Minister is completely misleading, loose with the truth, in suggesting you're going to get an immediate cut to your electricity bill of $130 a year. That's a complete and utter fiction. And as for jobs in the bush, there was a time when the National Party believed in productive industries like farming and mining. Kean is promising 9,000 jobs. I think that's inflated. But off the back of $32 billion worth of private investment, I think that's inflated as well. But if you do the calculation, Alan, that's $3.5 million a job. What sort of National Party is this, where they're talking about $3.5 million to generate one job, setting out solar panels and windmills across country New South Wales? I mean, this is a massive deterioration in the economic credibility of the National Party.
Let's go to Matt.
The old country party that used to believe in mining and agriculture as the backbone of the country.
Right, Mark. Well, we've got a lot to get through. Matt's in Canberra. Matt Canavan?
Well, on the jobs issue there, Alan, I'm not sure if Matt Kean's actually visited a working solar farm or wind turbine. Those of us who have would know it's pretty much impossible to meet somebody at a solar farm or a wind turbine. There are no jobs there. There are jobs in putting the solar panels together or erecting the wind turbines. But once that happens, the next time you'll see someone actually working at a solar farm or a wind turbine is when all the stuff has to be pulled down 20 or 30 years later and a big hole has to be dug to dump it all in.
Absolutely.
That's the jobs you get from renewable energy. You get a sugar hit and then nothing else. And in terms of prices, if they were so cheap, why do we need these taxes placed on people's power bills? That just the whole myth is destroyed by this piece of legislation.
Well, then he was asked, Matt. Then he was asked whether it was controversial, and he said there was nothing controversial about $58 billion it is now of new investment, providing the cheapest and most reliable energy anywhere on the planet. Listen to this.
There's nothing controversial about creating thousands of new jobs, particularly in the bush. There's nothing controversial about seeing billions of dollars worth of new investment coming into our economy. $58 billion worth of new investment this policy will deliver. And there's certainly nothing controversial about delivering New South Wales the cheapest, most reliable energy anywhere on the planet.
Mark, a quick response to that rubbish.
Well, he just makes it up, Alan. They're completely fabricated numbers and propositions. The truth is it's completely controversial because Kean is anti-nuclear, anti-coal, anti-gas, and is picking winners for renewable rent seekers, these slimes that sponge off public money consistently, and picking winners never works. Never in the history of economics has it worked anywhere in the world, and it won't work in New South Wales.
Matt, your thoughts?
Well, it's pretty controversial down here with the Federal Nationals Party, with, I know, the federal government. None of the legislation or modelling was shared with the federal government. So the Minister, Angus Taylor, has been out there objecting to these plans. I think it's pretty controversial. And again, it's controversial because it's not about the investment. If people want to come here and build a solar farm, look, we're an open, free country, you can do that, knock yourself out. What's controversial is that this bill establishes a fund to pay off renewable energy investors. The way that fund gets money is by putting a tax, or they call a contribution. Yep. You make a contribution in the terms of the bill. You pay a tax on your electricity bills to pay off the spivs in the renewable energy industry. Yep. That's what I think. It's controversial to put that sort of a tax on pensioners, on poor people.
Absolutely.
I think that's pretty controversial.
Well, let's see. He makes this boast about being an energy superpower, and we're going to become an economic superpower. Listen to this.
We can be not only an energy superpower, but an economic superpower, and that's too big an opportunity to pass up.
Mark?
Well, Alan, we've seen this movie before. In South Australia, when they went renewables, they closed down, brought forward the closure of the Northern Power Station. In Victoria, they went renewables, they brought forward the closure of Hazelwood, and the prices went through the roof and they had blackouts. So Matt Kean's just repeating the mistakes of other states. Why is that being inflicted upon New South Wales? What an error.
Well, it hasn't been discussed with anyone. Matt?
Well, and there's another data point. Mark's exactly right about South Australia. There's also Hazelwood as well. When after the Hazelwood power station was shut, electricity prices in Victoria shot up by 140%, well over doubled overnight, and caused huge stress there to their state. Now, keep in mind, the Hazelwood coal-fired power station was 1,600 megawatts. This plan looks at shutting down 8,520 megawatts of coal-fired power over the next 15 years. It represents about 70% of New South Wales' electricity supply. It is madness on stilts, Alan, to take out 70% of your state's reliable electricity without a proper plan to replace it, because all this talk about pumped hydro and batteries is really pie in the sky
Well,
stuff.
let's come to that. He was asked whether renewables were cheaper than coal. His answer says the same stuff, but he arrogantly asserts it's not based on ideology and idiocy. Listen to this.
Well, it's just not about renewable energy, it's about reliable energy. And right now, the cheapest way to power our electricity system is a combination of wind, solar, pumped hydro, batteries and gas. That's not me saying that, Laura. That's the CSIRO. That's the Australian Energy Market Operator, the independent operator of our electricity system. So what this is about is making decisions based on the engineering and the economics, not the ideology and the idiocy.
Well, before we go to Mark and Matt, he was also asked about the orderly transition, which he says will bring electricity prices down. Listen to this.
This plan is about facilitating the orderly transition from old infrastructure to new infrastructure to keep the lights on and drive those electricity prices down.
Mark?
Well, these are just lies, Alan. The CSIRO Gen Cost report clearly shows once you factor in the cost of storage, renewables are about the same price as fossil fuel power generation. Then when you factor in transmission costs, and Albanese said that's $20 billion, then when you factor in the subsidies that Matt Canavan has mentioned, then these renewables are more expensive than coal and gas. More expensive.
That's proven.
And,
that's proven everywhere.
He just won't accept the naked truth.
Matt, there's any number of studies about that. Matt Canavan?
Well, let's just put aside the studies. Let's just look at their own legislation here. If renewables were cheaper, why do you need to put a tax on people's power bills to pay off the investors in them? Because if they were cheaper, someone would just come along and build the solar battery, pumped hydro nirvana. They'd be able to undercut the existing coal-fired power producers and they'd make a lot of money. So why do we need to pay for it? The one service that Matt Kean has done here is that this legislation has absolutely killed the myth that renewables is cheaper. Because if they were cheaper, why do you need a tax on your bill to pay for it?
And that's why he doesn't want it discussed in the party room. Just before we go, Mark, I note the hydro mapping information, because Kean says pumped hydro will be essential to store electricity to back up green energy zones. But as you've said, Mark, sites for pumped hydro include dry gullies and water tanks. And mapping information provided by the ANU researchers included a disclaimer that, quote, none of the sites discussed in this study have been the subject of geological, hydrological, environmental, heritage and other studies, and it's not known whether any particular site would be suitable. Mark?
No, that's right. Nobody's visited these sites. It's quite remarkable. I stood there in the upper house. They're all like sheep wanting to pass this legislation. I said, has anyone visited any of these sites? It's off satellite mapping, you know, it's the equivalent of the koala set. It's off satellite mapping to pick out the contours of the land. I said, has anyone ever visited these sites? I have in southwest Sydney, and they are water tanks for town water, and dry gullies. Nobody's visited any of these sites, not the minister, not the department, not the Greens, not the Labor Party, and this is the most irresponsible thing you've ever seen.
Brilliant. Matt, quick one.
Well, very quickly, Alan, I mentioned that there was 8,520 megawatts of coal they're planning to close. To replace that with wind turbines, you'd need something in the order of 600,000 hectares of land. And that would just produce the same amount of power. It wouldn't produce at the right times, but it would produce the same amount of power on average. Now, I think people want to have their air conditioners on all the time, not on average. They want their fridges on all the time, not on average. But be that as it may, where are we going to find 600,000 hectares of land? And who's going to want these wind turbines next to them? Are they going to go next to Matt Kean's house? Are they going to go on Manly Beach? No, they're going to come out and be on the bush. And once again, it'll be people in the bush that have to stay awake at night so the guilty few in the cities can sleep.
Good on you. Brilliant, both of you. Scandal. Absolute scandal. It hasn't been discussed with anybody, but you blokes have both demolished it, and we'll resume the debate. Great to talk to you, Matt. Thank you, Mark. Thank you for everything you've done during the course of the year too, Mark. You've been brilliant fighting against the odds.
Alan.
So they
Thanks,
are.
Matt.
Mark Latham and Senator Matt Canavan.